Podcast. I am Matt Kirkner, your host, and as you know, we are live streaming all week from Automate. Absolutely phenomenal show. It is your exclusive chance, by the way, to learn from automation experts, and we're going to do just that here in just a moment with Drew Coleman. Before we get to that, I have to mention that we are live streaming from the FANUC Education Pavilion. FANUC, of course, more than 40 million automation products installed worldwide. Think about that, 40 million automation products installed worldwide is FANUC, and we are live from their Education Pavilion. People walking by all day saying hello, all kinds of excitement, all kinds of energy here at Automate. We're going to keep that going with Drew Coleman. Drew is Senior Director of MICHauto. He offices actually not far from the building that we're in right now, right here at Huntington Place in Detroit, Michigan. And Drew, it's just a pleasure to welcome you to the Tech Ed Podcast. Looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, thanks so much. Excited to be here.
So I don't know how much our listeners and our viewers know about MICHauto, so why don't we just start out with a general overview of the work that you're doing?
Yeah, so MICHauto is the state's only automotive mobility and tech cluster association in the state. So we work with OEMs, tier ones, tech companies, industry partners and educators and government to really assign the needs that are within the industry, the challenges that we face in talent, in policy, and really bring those voices to the table so that we can move the industry forward. So we have a lobbyist group, we have roundtables and convenings to really bring that group together so that we are making sure that the things that have made Detroit and Michigan so well known globally continue to grow into the next iteration of this industry as it's rapidly evolving.
And you have a long family history in this industry, as I understand. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I do. So my father, my brother, my uncle, my grandpa all retired from Ford.
Okay.
So, it's kind of like we say in Detroit, in my DNA. And it's something that I wasn't really sure I wanted to go into. And then I found myself back in, as part of a really great leadership team trying to carry that torch for Michigan.
Well, and it really is great to be able to carry that torch into the future. You think about the legacy of the automotive industry here in Michigan. I actually have a little bit of that in my DNA, or at least my family DNA as well. My father-in-law retired from General Motors in that case after 33 years rather, working at the GM plant in Janesville, Wisconsin. Certainly the automotive industry that your family grew up in, that my father-in-law grew up in, a lot of that same commitment to American manufacturing, commitment to the future of technology and innovation. I mean, where would we have been without 100+ years of innovation in the automotive industry? And that continues, but it's a world that's changing, especially here in Michigan. You think about the fact that we were really, when we thought about automotive in the past, it was always the big three, right? It was, and then that is what we thought about when we thought about the automotive industry. That is really, really changing, of course. I mean, it was the big three and tier one suppliers. Now we have the growing popularity of electric vehicles, we have autonomous vehicles, a lot more players, certainly from an OEM perspective, I think, in the automotive industry than we've seen historically, which is really changing the fundamental face of the industry, and I think creating tons and tons of opportunities along the way. But the truth of the matter is that we can't stand still, that this technology is changing, and we think about autonomy, we think about different power sources and so on. It is a industry that is going to continue to evolve, and that brings us back to Michigan, right? I mean, when we think about the automotive industry, when we think about Henry Ford, when we think about innovation in terms of how we manufacture products, we think about Motor City, we think about the state of Michigan, but everything's changing. What does Michigan need to do in order to remain relevant and competitive in this global mobility market?
Yeah, I'll just go back to something you said. It's manufacturing in America is very critical, right, to just the economic stability of our families and our communities, the dollars that if we buy a product that's made here, those dollars stay here. So there's a lot of value there. But I want to dispel some myths, I think, about the Detroit auto scene. It still is a big three, GM's right down the street, right. Ford's investing in Corktown, Stellantis is up in Auburn Hills, but it's not just them, right? It's those tier ones. There's, literally over 1,000 tier one suppliers in Michigan. There's 25, 26 OEM nameplates here. And when we look at the top 100 automotive suppliers to North America, 60 of them have a headquarters and R&D center here in Michigan. Wow. So that's that evolution, that future technology that's being implemented and designed. It's being done here, right? Obviously we think of GM and their tech center, Ford and their proving grounds, and Stellantis and their headquarters and all the things that are happening. But I always like to bring up Toyota, right? Mm-hmm. They have all of their North American R&D here, but also their sales. So those decision makers are here, and those, when you have the technologists and the folks that are buying and procuring product and technologies from others in the same location, that's something you see not only in those 4 companies, but the hundreds of other companies that are here. So Michigan, I think, is well positioned for that evolution of industry. We have really progressive policies around testing and validation on real world and in our testing facilities that we have all across the state, including up in the Upper Peninsula, which is a very different landscape,
right,
especially in the winter. So we have cold weather testing, we have real world testing, we have a smart parking lab in downtown Detroit that's a partnership with Bosch and others, just to try out all of those new technologies that maybe aren't ready for the consumer, but are being developed and will be for that next vehicle you're looking at. And I think all of this really hinges on having those skills and the knowledges and the abilities to implement those ideas into real world design and into the production floor. So there's a lot of things that we can learn from our history in Michigan, the automation, the assembly line, the steel and the grit, and transform that into a future that's really accessible to a lot of different people from different backgrounds. There's over 1,480 global companies here in Michigan as well, right? So it's a really global ecosystem. It's really well positioned to take those ideas coming out of university, implement them into this industry, and move forward.
Absolutely. Just reflecting on some of the things that you mentioned, Drew. I mean, first of all, just the fundamental importance of the manufacturing industry here in the United States and here in the state of Michigan. My in-laws, by the way, the father-in-law I mentioned just a moment ago, lives about 45 minutes away from the UP border with Wisconsin on the Wisconsin side, but certainly familiar with the diversity of your state in so many ways, including geographically and even weather patterns, right? You get up into the UP and Houghton, Hancock and those areas, and that can be much different in the wintertime even than a place like Detroit. So a very, very diverse state in so many ways, but a lot of it wrapped around this importance of American manufacturing. We like to talk about on the Tech Ed podcast how I think one of the silver linings, if you will, of the supply chain challenges that came along with the pandemic was the fact that the rest of the world understands now what those of us who've been working in manufacturing already knew, and that is that there is this fundamental importance of manufacturing that everybody took for granted. When you could get what you want when you wanted it at a price you wanted to pay for it, it was easy to take us in manufacturing for granted. And then all of a sudden, when you can't get that, now we understand the vital importance of American manufacturing. I think that's a good thing in the end, because I think we are getting a lot more attention now all over the country on the importance of the manufacturing sector, bringing manufacturing back to the United States and keeping it here. That's going to be a really, really fun evolution to watch. But to your point, as that evolution happens, we continue to innovate in manufacturing, certainly in the automotive industry, certainly with this, did you say 60 out of 100 of the Tier 1 suppliers are headquartered here in Michigan, which is just maybe not shocking, but it really is, gives you a sense for how important this area is, even as automotive companies exist and automotive manufacturing exists all over the United States, having that center of knowledge, that center of skill and ability and innovation happening right here in Michigan. So very important. Key to that innovation, and something we're hearing about all the time, and as a matter of fact, as I was driving into Detroit, you see all these billboards around electric vehicles, EV technology. That whole sector is full of opportunity, right? And we're just now innovating on battery life, and I just heard about a new corridor going on here in Michigan, between Michigan and the Canadian border, with the EV charging stations and kind of testing that. All this innovation, which is great for certainly the Stellantises and the GMs and the Ford of the world, but also for all these small companies and startups and new technologies and so on. Let's talk a little bit about that. How does MICHauto support the work of a startup? I'm a brand new company that's standing myself up and supporting the automotive industry. We certainly understand how you support the big three and others here in the state, but what about some of those smaller startup companies?
Yeah, so Detroit has an incredible startup scene and technology ecosystem. So step number one is just informing new companies on just what's available from a networking or engagement perspective. We partner with the state of Michigan in certain initiatives. Every other month, we host a mobility meetup. Our last mobility meetup was at New Lab at Ford Michigan Central Station, and we had 200, 300 folks there, all mingling, talking about technology. And that's where it benefits the OEMs. They see new folks and new ideas, but it also helps, break down some of those structural barriers that might exist in a corporate. So you can just meet someone, say, hey, my name's Drew. I've got this great idea. who do I talk to?
Sure.
And when you're in that environment, it's a lot easier. So it's really connecting them into that ecosystem. We host roundtables throughout the year, bringing those voices to the room, because again, if we're looking to design a product, we need to make sure that it works throughout the whole process, right? And that they understand what those cost constraints are when we're developing a new product, or what those supply chain challenges might look like, so that
Sure.
we can get ahead of that as much as possible. And it's not just on the road vehicles. Last summer, and we'll do one again this year, we hosted an outdoor recreation and mobility roundtable. So we had a ton of smaller companies and regional impact groups up in Traverse City and from the Upper Peninsula talking about electrification of off-road vehicles. That we don't have the chargers that we need at trailheads. How do we solve that problem?
Sure.
Right. So how do we bring in the Office of Infrastructure from the governor's team and bring in the trailhead authorities and all those groups? And we had companies like Polaris that maybe to the casual users, that's not a tech company, but they're looking at electrifying their vehicles for use in these new areas. So it's how do we connect those things? And in that room, someone said, hey, we have an idea for off-the-grid charging, and we made that connection. So it's really about having those conversations and talking about what's possible, which is something that companies do in their boardrooms too. They're like, hey, let's spend 30 minutes on this topic and just iterate on what we think's possible. And that's where some of those best ideas come from. So it's really a statewide approach and solving problems that are unique to that area or to that industry segment, and then just bringing those voices to the table and trying to say, well, why not? Let's see if we can do it.
So, and it really is about dreaming about what's possible. That's what I love about living in technology. That's what I love about being here at Automate. I mean, it's just, all these technologies, frankly, that 10 years ago when I stepped away from manufacturing, maybe a little less than that, a lot of the stuff didn't exist. We were just starting to get into collaborative robots. You think about, every booth that I walk by has some version of smart technology or artificial intelligence or machine learning or cloud computing. I mean, all of these things that are innovating in the world of manufacturing. And that's, like we said, it's certainly important for billion-dollar companies, but also important for those smaller startups that are innovating in their own right. You mentioned Polaris, and certainly an innovator. In my manufacturing days, I was a supplier to a company, to Polaris specifically. And you also mentioned an aspect of electrification that I hadn't even thought of, which is the ATVs and all these other vehicles that we use off-road for recreation and other purposes. All that is electrifying as well, both figuratively and literally. And how do we create the infrastructure around that? Be curious in terms of how your partners engage with you, whether it's a big three automaker, whether it's a tier one supplier to automotive, whether it's somebody innovating in technologies like autonomous mobility or EV. What does that feel like for them? How are they engaging with MICHauto?
Yeah, so I mentioned we have committees that we stand up on a quarterly basis, either from an advocacy perspective, and we host a Lansing Advocacy Day, and we host a tour of the auto show with legislators, because they don't know what they don't know.
Right.
They may not even know what companies or innovators in their backyard. So it's the education piece, right?
For sure.
So we bring our industry partners to those conversations as well. And then from a talent perspective, we have a talent and committee that we talk about, what are you guys facing? What's the challenges? What are those, feel felt found areas? You're like, if we had this, we could move forward. And we convene an employer-led collaborative to talk about future iterations of the skills and talents that are required for certificates or curriculums in the industry. So it's really based on our 4 pillars: advocacy, talent, next generation mobility, and convening. So it's really push-pull. If they say, hey, we've got a problem, how do we solve this? We start the conversation. We identify the right counterpoints. We bring those voices together, and it's really a collective impact at that point, because all of these companies that are here at the show today, but across Michigan, they employ people, they invest in communities, they are engaged in communities, either on other boards or committees or direct investment to the community. So it's about helping build that ecosystem. Yep. So that we can maintain that density of value chain, density of decision making, and that economic density that's here in Michigan.
And then your funding model. I mean, are you funded by? Is it government funded? Is it privately funded? Membership model? What does that look like? Yeah.
So we have investors. We have over 100 investors within the state. That's our primary, mechanism for, pursuing our mission. And, we do partner on, statewide grants, federal grants that we've been, honored to have a stake in, really bringing that industry voice into those conversations. So our primary funding is through our community of investors and our partners here across the state. And yeah, it's really, that makes us accountable to them, right?
Sure.
Everything that we do is really to further their voice and strengthen their voice here in the state of Michigan.
And these investors, are they primarily folks involved in the automotive industry? And then is it a 501c3 nonprofit? Is that the operation?
Yeah,
Okay.
we're a 501c3. They are majority are automotive centric, so tier ones, OEM, startups. But we have a Big 10 approach. So we have government partners that partner with us. We have reciprocal partnerships. Other industry groups. We have a lot of educational partners, economic development partners. And then there's folks that aren't partners, but we make sure that they're at the table because their voice is critical to solving these problems.
Absolutely. And it's in what we're finding more and more, all this is an and not or, right? Is the
Yes.
more people that we can get in the proverbial tent, I almost don't even like that term anymore because it's overused, but the more people we can get under the tent, the more conversations and dialogue we can have. We understand that there really is a shared purpose in terms of continuing to promote economic development, continuing to promote the automotive industry as it continues to morph and change. And so obviously great work that you're doing. Speaking of those morphs and those changes, one of the things that's changing significantly is this whole idea around autonomy. I mean, we haven't talked about Tesla yet, but Elon Musk was quoted not too long ago as saying that by the year 2030 we won't be able to buy a new car that doesn't drive itself. Took a trip to North Dakota a couple weeks ago and got stuck in a traffic jam because of an automobile accident on the way back from North Dakota, and set the cruise control on the vehicle, and it was literally like stopping and starting without me. It's that technology's been around for a little while, but it's just a reminder of how quickly we're innovating and how cars are becoming more and more autonomous, and that is going to continue. So talk about the innovation in Michigan around autonomous vehicles and autonomous mobility.
Yeah, autonomy is an incredible challenge, right? I think from a lot of our engineers and designers. It's also one of those, how do you keep the human engaged into the implementation process?
Yep.
There's all those viral videos of a Tesla driver sleeping, right? That's not allowed. That's
not now anyway.
That's not
maybe
cool.
10 years from now, but not today, right?
And then it's also balancing, autonomy. In a perfect world, if we took all vehicles away, put all autonomous vehicles in, done.
Yep.
So, signed, sealed, delivered. But the average age of the vehicle on the roads today is around 11 years old, right? So you add all these complexities, and then the mapping and the V to I, V to X, V to V interactions, and the security, the cybersecurity of all those pieces of information being shared. It's an incredible long chalkboard equation that really isn't stumping the industry, but it's causing a lot of pause to make it right.
For sure.
We all have smart devices in our pockets, on our wrists, that we interact with all day. Maybe our refrigerator at home or our Nest device.
We're not putting our lives in their hands.
If that fails once a week, you're like, oh, it's inconvenient, but it's
exactly.
It is what it is.
Right.
If your vehicle fails once a year while you're going at 70, 80 miles an hour, it's traumatic.
Exactly.
Right? But that's why it's so important to have that density of thought, bringing those different diversities of thought together to say, how does it interact in this scenario? How does it do it this way? And there's all different levels of autonomy, right? I think to the average consumer, you think of it as a self-driving, no-touch vehicle, maybe not even a steering wheel. But, there's 5 levels of autonomy, and you kind of start at a level 1, and there's autonomous systems in everyone's vehicle today, braking assistance, lane assist, all those different things. So there's a lot of really useful technologies that are in everybody's vehicle today, and I think we'll see that move forward and forward and forward. Elon Musk is a dreamer. He's a future focused guy. I wouldn't say by 2030 is my personal target of when I expect that to look completely different. But yeah, I think there's a time coming, just like with electrification or alternative fuels, where we're going to have a much different commute than we do today. And everyone, no matter where you live, complain about traffic congestion. I've lived in Detroit, in Metro Detroit, for most of my life, and we complain. It's nothing like you see in Tokyo or LA or New York. So when you look at the efficiencies that creates, it's amazing.
Oh, it is.
So I'm excited. I've got to go up to Mackinac Island next week for our big conference.
Beautiful. And
I would love for 4.5 hours to type on my laptop. It basically takes mass transit to the consumer. There's a lot of value there. And then you look into what is the change in consumer ownership of a shared vehicle at that point. If it's autonomous, is it more of a commodity and you just order it up in your app? And so there's so many different questions. There's so many horizons. And in Michigan, we're working on a lot of those things, right?
Sure.
With the Office of Future Mobility and Electrification, which is the state's Office of Mobility, and trying to look at all those things. They have grants and programs to test those things here in the state of Michigan. At testing facilities like M-City or ACM, which are both in Ann Arbor, or on the road. So we're seeing those. I remember a few years ago, which really seemed like it was too early even, but we were leading in that space. They did a platoon of autonomous vehicles from Detroit up to Traverse City for the car MBS conference, right? So we're seeing that already. It's a reality. It's a future reality, and I think that it's getting that perfect mix of policy and user adoption and the technologies, and then the semiconductors, which was something that the industry,
the last 3 years,
especially the automation industry, has been dealing with for the last 3 years. So it's really exciting. I would love to be hands off in a vehicle and just get some other things done, but we'll see. I think it's going to take more than 7 years, in my prediction, but I'd love to be pleasantly surprised.
Yeah, well, and nobody knows for sure, right? And whether it's 2020, 2030, 2040, I mean, we know that it's coming. There's no question about it. The fascination that I have, or at least the consideration, is when Elon Musk told us 10 years ago or whatever it was that he could blast a rocket off into space and then land it on the launch pad. I was like, yeah, whatever. Like, that's ever going to happen. And now he's doing it with SpaceX. I don't know if we'll have completely self-driving cars in 7 years or not, but I guess I wouldn't count out the possibility. And in any event, that technology is coming. I use as far as user adoption, I was thinking about getting on an elevator. And, we could go 3 hours from here to downtown Chicago, and we could get on an elevator, go to the top of the Willis Tower. It's a quarter mile in the air. Back in the day when we had elevator operators, the idea that we would get in an elevator by ourselves and shoot ourselves a quarter mile into the sky without thinking twice about it, it seems kind of crazy. I think that technology is coming in the world of autonomous vehicles as well, and we'll just have to keep our eyes open on how quickly it does, because I too am looking forward to that day when I can just get in a vehicle that I dial up on an app that shows up in front of my house and takes me where I want to go, and I can work or talk to somebody or do whatever I want in the meantime and arrive at my destination. Really, really exciting future. None of that happens though without a talented workforce, right? And I know that's a huge part of the work that you're doing, huge part of Automate as well. We're sitting here in the FANUC Education Pavilion. FANUC has made huge investments in the whole world of educating the next generation of roboticists, of robotic technologists, of operators and programmers. So huge investments there, huge investments happening here in Michigan. When you think about the future, Drew, of automotive manufacturing technology and so on, as all these different applications of EV and autonomous vehicles are changing, what do we need to be thinking about from an education standpoint in terms of inspiring kids and young people toward the right careers, and then giving them the competencies and skills they need to be successful when they get there?
Yeah, I think first it's start early and do it often, right? So, third grade reading scores matter and eighth grade math scores matter. So if we can inspire young people early, especially females. Females have a higher dropout rate of STEM programming than their male counterparts, and a lot of that is because they don't see themselves in that industry.
Totally.
So it's about being purposeful about talking about the opportunities that exist. Walking the show floor, and we'll be doing that on Thursday. We'll have over 200 young people here going through the FANUC booth, talking to exhibitors, saying like, what do you do? What do you do here? If you usually ask a third grader, what do you want to be when you grow up? You get fanciful things like a ballerina or a princess, or like really practical things.
I still kind of want to be a princess, but whatever, it didn't work out yet.
Then you would have a carriage carrying you around versus an autonomous vehicle.
An autonomous one.
Right. Or you get really practical things that they see in their daily lives. Maybe I want to be a firefighter or a police officer. And they're all great, right?
Right.
But like, they don't know what they don't know as it relates, especially the automotive industry and the automated industry, because these aren't nameplates that you see in your house or in your pocket, right? I know what Apple is. I know what Google is. I use those every day. If I'm a young person, I want to do technology and automation, those are who come to mind.
Right.
But the number of, consumer goods that maybe don't have a label that we're familiar with, or the product behind the screen,
right?
Those are amazing companies. Many of them have facilities here in the U.S. They provide really attractive opportunities not only for like high-end, coders or application developers, but, assembly and technician level, there's great career opportunities, hands-on, every day's a little different, problem solving. So I think it's really about that experiential learning piece that's so critical to young minds, to inspire them and say, wow, like I can see myself doing this. I remember when I was a kid, we had plant days at the plant that my dad worked at, and they had open houses every summer, and you get to walk through part of it, because you got to stay out of the different lanes. But it's just, I reflect on that image that I had when I was a 8, 10, 12-year-old to, flying overseas in a previous role and walking through a semiconductor factory.
Right.
And it was just night and day.
Mm-hmm.
The technologies that are in plants, the autonomy, the systems, the different skills that you see on display are so important and so dynamic today. So it's really about that early exposure, because that's going to drive them to understand why I've got to take Algebra 2, which I didn't get.
Right.
I was like, I'm doing this because I have to, and I want to go to college, but I don't, like, what's the application of this theorem? They can see that and they can be inspired, because they're going to ask why. Like, why do I have to do this? And there's a lot of things as well, like being active, sports, that communication, being in discourse, because it's not all, you can't just do everything from your phone. So being social and all those different skill sets really build a great teammate, right? When I think of who would I want to work with on a project at work, it's the person that I can push back and forth on, that are going to ask the right questions, that are going to see where I'm coming from, even if it's not a direct path. And all those things are exactly what we do in automation, because you're not going to get a roadmap. You're going to get a solution.
Right.
This is what we need you to do. We need to put 12 eggs in a carton.
Yep.
Don't break any eggs.
Right.
And they've got to be long side up, right? There's all these parameters, and they just say, do it.
Yep.
So, the rest of it is creativity and, and coding and core skills. So it's really about inspiring them to understand that they can solve that problem.
Right.
And then just allowing them to express that. In Michigan, we have a really strong robotics programs, FIRST and VEX and Square One.
Right.
Those are great opportunities.
FANUC CERT, by the way, as we're sitting in the FANUC Pavilion. Yeah.
Yeah. So like getting that opportunity to fail, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because, your first autonomous vehicle, your first solar vehicle, your first whatever vehicle isn't going to work.
Right.
And then you're going to learn from that, and you're going to learn from that. It's the same kind of process that, I went through when I had to change my oil the first time, and I found really quickly that I was going to take it into a shop, but I learned how to do it.
Right.
I got it all over my face.
Right.
There were some,
as long as you didn't drive it to the shop afterwards, you're okay, right?
So those are things. It's just that experience is really critical for young people, and for people that aren't so young, that are saying like, well, I don't want to do this anymore. What else is there?
Yep.
There's great coding academies. There's really great opportunities for people to investigate those opportunities. So we just have to inspire that next generation of learning. That's really going to take us a long way, not only here in Detroit, but everywhere in the U.S.
Yeah, no doubt about it. You think about so many great points you made there, but number one, that inspiration, the number one influencer of a young person's career pathway when they're in middle school and high school is their interests and experiences while they're in middle school and high school. It's not a career advisor. It's not a parent. It's not social media. It's not their friends. It is, what did they experience while they were going through that path? What inspired them? What kind of lit that spark? And then that is what influences their long-term career decisions. And you're right, in middle school, girls will start turning off to certain career pathways, and that's actually been studied, and it's proven. I have a gentleman I know well at Hennepin Technical College in suburban Minneapolis, actually wrote his master's thesis on that topic. And it's not so much that they're deciding what they want to do, but they're categorizing certain career pathways as, quote, boys' jobs. And not that should even be a term, but it is, at least in their brains. And so getting around that and inspiring them as early as possible, really, really important. You certainly suggest all the soft skills like creativity and problem solving and innovation, really important. And then giving them those hands-on experiences as well, whether it's VEX or FIRST Robotics or certainly the FANUC CERT program and others, but FANUC by far the leader in that whole category. All these opportunities to inspire these young people toward really, really cool career pathways. So we've only got a few minutes left. I have two more questions I want to get to here yet, Drew. The first one is, as you're walking around Automate, you're seeing all these technologies, you're meeting incredible people, it's, all these educational breakout sessions and so on. What are some of the trends, or maybe one trend in particular that you see taking place in the world of manufacturing, the world of automation, or that you're seeing here at Trends, and tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing right now, and we've been hearing this for a while, like that I4O, that industry,
right.
that connected and full kind of system-wide automation.
Yep.
So you're seeing a lot of that. You're seeing all these share robots, co-robots, and that autonomy, that AI that's being integrated into the shop floor.
Yeah.
10 years ago, none of that was happening.
Right.
And if it was, there was huge pushback. I don't trust it. It's I don't want to be next to something that is dangerous, because those first robots that were implemented 25 30 years ago now, they were very different than what we're seeing today.
By comparison, totally different, right?
So I think that's the big trend, is just that cobot, that autonomous robot that can interact with people. And it's not really replacing jobs. It's making those repetitive things easier, so that you can do things that are higher value, more dexterous skill that's more dynamic. So it's pretty cool. I'm sure there's probably somewhere in here like some sort of ChatGPT style model that you can look at.
For sure.
Just seeing that go full scale is incredible. I would have never thought that was a thing.
Right.
So it's really cool to see that fully on display here, especially in the pavilion that we're sitting in, with all the different, connecting that to the technology piece with the education. It's really inspiring.
It is inspiring. And you think back to Ray Kurzweil has been telling us for, more than a generation that at some point we'd reach the singularity where the computers would be, as smart or thinking like humans. And I think we're getting pretty close. And some people are scared of that. I think it's really, really cool if we can harness that technology in the right way. It's really, really exciting for the future. Of course, with a name like the Tech Ed Podcast and being on a mission to secure the American dream for the next generation, we have to be on top of those technologies. So one final question here for Drew Coleman, and it's this, Drew, and it's a question we like to pose to all of our guests here, and that is, if you were to go back in time to that 15-year-old Drew Coleman, you come from generations of people that worked at Ford, generations in the automotive industry, growing up here in Michigan. You go back and tell that 15-year-old kid one thing. What's that one piece of advice you would give the 15-year-old Drew Coleman?
Well, I think first, just be nicer to your parents. They're putting up with a lot. I was a good kid, I think, but there was moments. But I think it's just like, don't stop asking why.
Yeah.
Or why not.
Like it.
I think that's something that has gotten me a long way in my career. It's helped me discover new things and new things about people. It's when you meet someone, like, why do you make it that decision that way, or why haven't we done this, or why don't we try it again? That why is such a powerful question.
Sure.
And I think the other piece, as you're looking at your first job or your first career, you're in that meeting for a reason. Use your voice, and be present. Be a part of that conversation, that discussion, because you're there for a reason, and anything that you do. So that whole I need to wait till I'm proven. No, you're there for a reason. So ask the question.
Absolutely. I think about all my years in manufacturing, and your first piece of advice and the asking why, actually your second, because the first one was be nice to your parents. And yes, no doubt about it. We used to use what we call the 5 why, which was, a root cause analysis tool where you ask why 5 times. And usually by the time you get to the 5th why, something happened. Now you're at the actual root cause as opposed to a symptom of a preceding cause. Same thing. Never stop asking why, understanding what's taking place, and be inquisitive and be curious. And then to your point, be present and use your voice. Don't be afraid to stand up and speak your mind. Some of the best ideas in the businesses that I've run over time are from young people who had the guts to say, hey, there's another way of doing this, or have we considered such and such, or as I'm asking why, here's what I'm finding out. So don't be afraid to speak up. So we're glad that you spoke up. We're glad that you were present. Drew Coleman, Senior Director of MICHauto. Great conversation today about the future of manufacturing, especially in the automotive sector. Technology's changing, what we need to do for the next generation to prepare that next generation of talent inside and outside of the manufacturing and the automotive manufacturing sector. Thank you so much for taking some time for us here at Automate on the Tech Ed Podcast.
Thank you.